The argument of the book is that Donald Trump wasn't a historical accident. He was almost historically inescapable by 2016. And that thesis actually was proven, really, by the 2020 election. He didn't win it, obviously.
But he won 74 million votes.
He won 25 states. Had it not been for COVID, I think we would still be talking about a Donald Trump presidency. We would still be rolling in bed in the moment, and our first waking act would be to see what he'd said on Twitter overnight. You know, and it wasn't just a political phenomenon, Matt. It was an economic phenomenon. It was a cultural phenomenon. It was a technological phenomenon. It was a racial phenomenon. So many American trend lines converged and culminated in his successful candidacy. I mean, just to give you a couple of examples, when he said the American dream was dead, people believed him. They felt like economic castaways, not just in the globalized economy, but in the digital economy as well. Technologically, Facebook and Twitter had placed in his hands these weapons that he could use in politics, and also they placed in the hands of the Russians weapons that they could use as well. Racially, what was the reaction to America's first African-American president? Well, for many people, it was a white backlash. The Republican Party had almost become the anti-Obama party, so it made perfect sense to them to go for somebody who was a virulently anti-Obama candidate. It wasn't a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. There was massive customer buy-in from the base. Donald Trump wasn't an accident. And Matt, I still think he can be president if it hadn't been COVID.
That's a good point. And you know, my next question then is logically, you know, should we focus less on the idea that he might come back again? And you know, we played that clip of him on Fox News with Laura Ingraham just a minute ago. And should we focus more on the question of who will inherit his mantle?
Look, Trump is still the dominant figure in the American conservative movement. He regards himself as the presumptive nominee in 2024.
Does he really?
Yeah, I was down at the CPAC conference a few weeks ago in Florida. He spoke to an adoring crowd. Outside was an even more adoring crowd. Some of the same sort of people who were storming the Capitol on January the 6th. And it was as if, Matt, that January the 6th just hadn't happened. For the Republican Party, the storming of the Capitol was not a pivotal event. Later that night, of course, almost half the Republican lawmakers went into the House and Senate and voted to overturn the election.
Astonishing. Yeah.
You still look at the polling and it shows that Donald Trump is by far the most popular Republican in the party. And the reason why Trumpism, Matt, is so strong is that Trumpism has existed for so long. It's just that it hadn't been given that name yet. I mean, there's been sort of prototypes of Donald Trump. If you look at Pat Buchanan in the 90s, or Ross Perot in the 90s, or Sarah Palin in the noughties. You know, there have been these Trump-like figures. There has been that seabed of Trumpism for him to come along and harness all those historical forces. And all those historical forces, Matt, are still there. Indeed, in some ways, the Trump presidency, in many ways, has been even more of an accelerant of polarization.
So just very quickly, you think he'll run again?
I don't know. I think it's a bit of a tease at the moment, just to raise some money. I mean, he's getting old. He loves playing golf. Will he want to have the possibility of losing again? I don't know. But I don't think he'll make up his mind right until the end, partly because it's a really good source of an awful lot of money.
Which he needs, of course. He's got lots of unpaid debts as well. Just one other one. You know, you've got a young family. You've been living in Brooklyn now, in New York for quite some time. You know, you were in America before. You know, I think I clocked up 11 years in America. You might have clocked up even more. Has writing this book and thinking about America hard make you like the place more, or dislike it so much that you want to move your family out of there eventually?
Matt, you know how much I love this country. You know, we covered a lot of this history together at an extraordinary time. You arrived in America, I think, in 2002, a year after 9/11, and we experienced that extraordinary phase of the war on terror, the Iraq War, all of those things. And we were, in some ways, present at the destruction, weren't we? Because America had started the millennium really as the sole unipower, the hyperpower in a unipolar world, and we've watched its decline ever since then. Look, it's a love letter, it's a lament. I adore this country. I've got skin in the game. My daughter is American. I hope she will, grow up to love this country just as much as her dad. But Matt, honestly, I'm pessimistic at this country at the moment. States of America, even the very term sounds like a misnomer and an oxymoron.
Finally, and very briefly, Nick, do you miss covering Donald Trump, waking up to that Twitter feed every morning because it was sort of low-hanging fruit for journalists? Or are you happy to be released?
Look, it really was, but presidencies aren't there for journalistic entertainment value. And in many ways, it does feel like going to an all-night rave for 4 years, coming home and turning on classic to get fed. It's a presidency you can have on the background, but as you know, sometimes presidencies that you can have on the background are actually quite effective at getting things done.
Indeed, and they might even make the headlines. Nick Bryant, author of When America Stopped Being Great, The History of the Present. Thank you very much for talking to me. Good luck with everything. It's a great book. Coming up, we're going to talk about Myanmar, where there's been an appalling act of violence yet again this morning. Over 90 people apparently killed by action of the army, of the police against pro-democracy demonstrators in the streets of Myanmar. I'm Matt Clyde. This is Overseas. The time is 12:50.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Majid Nawaz.
The Prime Minister just met the group of MPs that China sanctioned in retaliation for drawing attention to the Uyghur genocide. Are we tough enough against China?
Majid Nawaz on LBC.
At Lidl, we're big on Easter, big on big brands like Maltesers or Galaxy eggs from £2.79, or finding your favourite flavour with a large Smarties orange egg, also £2.79, all from the Retail Industry Awards Supermarket of the Year. Now that's big on quality and always little on price. Subject to availability, selected stores, excludes NI.
We could use big words like striking, muscular, or captivating to tell you what it looks like. Or use an alluring combination of colourful words to describe exactly what it feels like. But all you really want to hear is this. Discover the new M3 Competition Saloon and M4 Competition Coupe from BMW. Available to test drive from April. M, the most powerful letter in the world.
When your tenants have a burst pipe, superheroes crashing through the wall isn't going to help anyone. With Direct Line Landlord Emergency added to your policy, we're on it to send a rather super plumber in 4 hours and guarantee they'll use the doorbell. We can also assemble locksmiths, glaziers, electricians and drainage engineers. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line.
Residential properties. Optional add-on up to 1,500 per call-out. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Jamal Khashoggi, a prominent Saudi journalist, has gone missing after visiting his country's consulate in Istanbul.
From the Oscar-winning director of Icarus comes the explosive BAFTA-nominated documentary
The king firmly denies any knowledge of it.
about the crime that shook the world.
Saudi Arabia now suddenly is admitting that Khashoggi did die inside that building.
I just received this. There's a team is going to kill you soon.
The Dissident, available on Amazon Prime Video from April 1st. Visit thedissident.film to find out more.
The peregrine falcon. The fastest living thing on the planet. Until that is, Marcus from Melbourne here caught wind of Volkswagen's 3 months on us offer. Just look at him go. Such speed, such grace. Magnificent.
Enjoy 3 months on us on eligible stock vehicles up to 3.2% APR representative. You'll need to be quick. Contact your local Volkswagen retailer with Solutions PCP. 3 months discount is provided by reducing our standard interest rate. Ordered and delivered by May 4th, 2021. Stock vehicles only. APR may change April 1st, 2021. Minimum 46-month agreements only. Excludes Golf Hatch M8 and all electric and e-hybrid vehicles. T&C supply. Indemnities may be required. Volkswagen Finance.
Every major plus the Ryder Cup exclusively live on Sky Sports Golf. Upgrade today for just £10 extra a month. Unforgettable. Witness the world's best go head-to-head at the Masters, the PGA Championship, the US Open, the Open, plus the Ryder Cups. To upgrade for just £10 extra a month, search Get Sky Sports.
Offer ends 11th of April. See sky.com for more details. Sky TV required. Further terms apply.
Can't sleep? Get the most comfortable night's sleep guaranteed or your money back. My Pillow is the most comfortable pillow you'll ever own and comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and 10-year warranty. It's why we've sold 50 million worldwide. Right now, get 2 pillows for the price of 1. But hurry, offer must end 31st of March. Buy 1, get 1 free. Visit mypillow.co.uk and use promo code SLEEP.
My Pillow. It's always nice to get something extra when you've not had to ask for it. And the more extra, the better. A complimentary drink is nice,
you could upgrade to a new Hyundai and get up to £3,000 off. Visit Hyundai.co.uk before the end of March to find out more. T's and C's apply. Saving against list price. Over 18s and participating dealers only. Savings vary by model. £3,000 off applies to 2020 Santa Fe model only.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with Matt Fry.
Now we're going to end the show with some information about Burma. This is, or Myanmar, I should say. This is breaking news. Local media in Myanmar are now saying that more than 90 people, in fact, have died after security forces shot and killed pro-democracy protesters. Remember, these protests have been going on ever since the military coup at the end of January. They simply won't go away. These people will not stay at home. They're from a broad range of society, and every week we see the level of violence against them stepping up a notch, and the biggest leap, I think, is probably what's happened today. More than 19 people killed. Let's go to Dr. Ronan Lee. He's an expert on Myanmar and author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide. Good morning, Ronan.
How are you?
Good, very well. Good to speak to you again. What do you make of this, and what are the reports, and are they credible?
Well, the reports are certainly credible. I'm hearing exactly the same thing from Myanmar. Upwards of 90 people murdered by the military today. This is a military, of course, that put a message on state media yesterday warning peaceful protesters that soldiers would be aiming for their heads. This is a military that we know has used snipers to target peaceful protesters, and that explains the high death counts that we've seen in peaceful protests. That protesters are not, I mean, the shooting at protesters is not to disperse crowds. The shooting is designed to murder them, and that's why the death counts have been so high. This is a brutal military. It's a military that knows really one language, and that's a language of violence. And it's come up against a very determined population in Myanmar. They just do not want the military back in control of their country. They understand the brutality and violence that they will face in the future if the military can stay in power, and they just don't want it. And they're very bravely facing down a brutal armed force.
Tell me how, the military of Myanmar could go from working with Aung San Suu Kyi, working with a democratically elected government, opening up the politics, to basically waging war against its own people.
Well, they never really stopped waging war against their own people. What they got when they cooperated with Aung San Suu Kyi was a lifting of international sanctions and an opening up of the economy that suited them. I mean, the military has, and then we've seen some sanctions on military companies this week from the UK and the US. The military owns massive conglomerates. I mean, this is an entity that really should be understood as a sort of organised.
It's a military-industrial complex, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It's about enriching the generals and their families and their cronies, and they use violence to achieve that. But if they can use other methods to achieve that too, such as enlisting the services of Aung San Suu Kyi or giving the international community the impression that there would be some movement towards democracy to open up economic opportunities, they'll do that too. They are utterly self-interested. They should always be regarded in those terms. So their language that they try to use around there will be elections in the future, no one in Myanmar takes that seriously. Okay. We're seeing that on the streets.
Finally, and very briefly, in 10 seconds, Ronan, could this lead to all-out civil war?
Oh, unquestionably, it's definitely heading in that direction. The military's lost control of the country, and the people are very determined, and they are not going to give up.
Well, watch that space. We'll speak to you again. Very miserable but important story. Dr. Ronan Lee there, expert on Myanmar, author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide. Thanks to all of you for listening, for calling in, for my guests, for providing all the wonderful analysis and perspective that we've had in the last 3 hours. I'll do the whole thing again soon, after Easter. I'm back at 10 o'clock after Easter, not on Easter Saturday. At 4, it's David Lammy. Up next, Manjeet Awad. Thank you, man.
Coming up, high street shops will be allowed to stay open until 10 p.m. when lockdown restrictions are eased, as the Chancellor urges people to go and have fun and spend money. Eat out to help out anyone? How do we ensure this isn't one step forward and 2 steps back again? Before that, Britons could have their faces scanned to allow them to access pubs, gigs and sports events under one government-funded plan being drawn up for vaccine passports. Are you worried about data privacy? But first, a group of MPs that China sanctioned in retaliation for drawing our attention to the Uyghur genocide met the Prime Minister at number 10 just now. How serious should we take China's retaliation? Are we tough enough in response to what they've done? And should our attention now shift to firms that sell goods made with Uyghur slave labor?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock, Boris Johnson has described protesters who clashed with police in Bristol last night as a mob intent on violence. Officers say bricks were thrown and lasers shone in their eyes during a demonstration against the government's policing bill. A cordon had been set up around the police station, which was attacked during last weekend's first march. 10 people were arrested. Former Greater Manchester Police Chief Sir Peter Fahey says officers showed enormous restraint.
Clearly there is a minority of people there who come armed with eggs, bottles and paint and wanted to challenge the police, and the police quite rightly have used proportionate force to push back. It's never going to look pretty.
Stay local measures have been lifted in Wales. It means there are no travel restrictions within the country for the first time in 3 months. The relaxed rules also allow 6 people from 2 households to meet outdoors, and self-contained holiday accommodation can reopen. Thomas Scarrett runs a caravan park in Clynderwen in Pembrokeshire.
It's fantastic. I mean, walking around the park today, seeing the smiles on people's faces after many months of lockdown, it's a pleasure to see. We're just really happy.
Boris Johnson says England's route out of lockdown remains on schedule, but the Prime Minister's warned we should be honest about the difficulties ahead, saying the impact of Europe's latest wave of cases is still unclear. Local media in Myanmar now say more than 90 people have died after security forces shot and killed pro-democracy supporters. They're enforcing a crackdown on demonstrations against last month's coup. The protests coincide with Armed Forces Day, a national holiday which includes a military parade in the country's capital. Spain is to become the first country in Europe to experiment with reducing the working week. A 3-year pilot will use money from the European Union's Coronavirus Recovery Fund to help 200 companies move to a 4-day week without cutting salaries. The government thinks a 32-hour working week could improve productivity. Wales will be presented with the Rugby Union's Six Nations trophy later after France failed to claim the title for themselves last night. Scotland's victory in Paris meant Wayne Pivac's side topped the table. Dan Biggar will be one of the Welsh players to pick up a winner's medal. He admits he struggled to watch last night's match.
I can understand what family members and partners and friends go through now on a regular basis watching us. And I was just a bag of nerves, really. I couldn't sit down for longer than sort of 5-10 minutes at a time. I actually went down the road twice, I think, throughout the evening.
And the weather, most places dry and bright this afternoon, but becoming cloudy in the northwest, a high of 15. From Global's newsroom, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Majid Nouaz.
Good afternoon. It's Majid Nouaz here on LBC, leading Britain's conversation for the regular weekend show. Stay with us for the end of this show, for the last hour, to discuss the idea that the Chancellor has urged us to go out and have fun, saying that shops will be allowed to stay open until 10 p.m. But we've been there before, right, with Eat Out to help out. So how do we make sure that this isn't 1 step forwards and 2 steps back again, considering that the emergency powers were extended for 6 months, so they have every government power needed to reverse course on this? But anyway, that's the last hour's conversation. And before that, we'll be discussing data privacy and the idea that now it's being suggested that we could, well, have to scan our faces to get into pubs via certain government-funded schemes. Again, nothing is confirmed yet, and I'll be speaking about monitoring staff at their workstations as well as via facial recognition, as well as using facial recognition to allow us into venues like pubs, and what the consequences for privacy are around that. But first up, it is the story of the hour, actually, as well as having been the story of the week. Now, you would have all heard that the group of MPs and campaigners that were campaigning and legislators are working to impose Magnitsky Act sanctions on individuals concerned with human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Those abuses, I and many others, including Essex Court Chambers report, take very seriously indeed and believe was genocide. The US State Department and Secretary of State Blinken taking the same view, the Canadian Parliament taking the same view, and I believe the Dutch taking the same view. Our country, Britain, has not yet determined this as a genocide and has indeed no mechanism currently through which to make such a determination. But the campaigners behind trying to get Britain to declare the abuses against the Uyghur people as a genocide did succeed, not in that task, but they did succeed in the end through a government compromise, because for whatever reason, which we can discuss, obviously, the government didn't want to allow the Genocide Amendment to pass, but what they did do is compromise and allow Magnitsky Act sanctions. Magnitsky, keep in mind, originally that was drafted as law to retaliate against Russia for either poisoning or killing dissidents and opponents there, and it was deemed necessary that some form of retaliatory measures were needed for our country to send a message to those countries that go after human rights campaigners that that's no longer acceptable. Well, it was passed regarding Russia, but of course the act itself is something that is open and general to human rights abuses anywhere. So those campaigners managed in the end through a government compromise, as I said, because unfortunately the Genocide Amendment didn't pass, but the good news is the government compromise entailed Magnitsky sanctions against those individuals in China that were concerned with these human rights abuses. Well, what happened since, for those of you who follow the story, is that China retaliated and named its own sanctions against those campaigners and legislators who were involved, and China then decided to sanction the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tory MP Tom Tugendhat, to sanction Lord Alton of Liverpool, who was author of an amendment allowing trade deals with countries that do commit genocide. They decided also to sanction Baroness Kennedy of the Shores, and Tory MPs Neil O'Brien, Tim Loughton, and MP Nusrat Ghani. And so, of course, this retaliation led to what is, as I say, this is the news of the hour, because when China retaliated against those campaigners and legislators, that, of course, upped the ante. Because our sanctions that were imposed against those individuals were timed with EU, Canadian, and American sanctions as well, after China's retaliation, the Prime Minister probably had no choice but decided, for whatever reason, credit where credit is due, decided to meet the legislators that were sanctioned by the Chinese regime in order to send a message that he will not tolerate our MPs and campaigners being intimidated by one of the world's superpowers simply for trying to represent the human rights of an oppressed people. So the good news is the group of MPs, the Interparliamentary Alliance, Ian Duncan Smith, former Conservative Party leader, and others, including Nusrat Ghani MP, met with the Prime Minister just roughly about a couple of hours ago at number 10. And joining us now, I'm incredibly proud to say, is one of those who met with the Prime Minister, Nusrat Ghani MP, Conservative MP for Wealden, and who has been, I'd say, one of the key campaigners behind the Genocide Amendment and eventually the Magnitsky-style sanctions imposed on individuals involved or concerned with the abuses against the Uyghur people. So Nusrat Ghani joins us now. Ms. Ghani, thank you very much.
Thank you, Majid, and that introduction is probably why I got sanctioned. But before I move on, can I just put on record my thanks to you, Majid, and to LBC for just working so hard by shedding light on what's happening in Xinjiang. So we're incredibly grateful for all the airtime you've given for us to talk about the plight of the Uyghur. Thank you.
That's neither here nor there. In fact, I consider it my duty. Thank you for your campaign. This is, albeit a compromise, still, I think, good news. How, first of all, before I get to the meeting with the Prime Minister you just had, to your knowledge, how have the World Uyghur Congress and the Uyghur people generally responded to the news of the Magnitsky sanctions, and what do they want next with regards to a genocide determination? What is their strategy next?
So just for the audience to understand, on Monday, the UK government put sanctions against a number of individuals that are seen as being complicit in the mass abuse of the Uyghur in Xinjiang. And when we talk about mass abuse, we're talking about 2 million people incarcerated in prison camps. And why it matters to us in the UK is because the goods they are forced to make end up on our supply chains. So the Uyghur community and the World Uyghur Congress and all those fantastic people were pleased that finally we put sanctions in place, because we haven't done that for some time. And you're right, we had the Genocide Amendment fall at the last hurdle on the trade war, but the government's concession was pretty stellar, to be honest. It means that it's a policy now that we will never be undertaking preferential trade deals with countries complicit in genocide. And there's also a process, a select committee process for those individuals and groups of people who feel that they are targeted genocide to come forward and give evidence. So it was a solid compromise, to be honest, Majid. Obviously, I'd love to do more for the Uyghur people. We'll continue campaigning. But it feels as though that is now ancient history because the sanctions, Majid, have changed everything. The sanctions against us parliamentarians, forgive me, has changed everything.
The retaliatory sanctions that China then imposed against you parliamentarians, you're saying that's changed the debate, has it?
Yeah, so basically the UK government with a number of other fantastic countries sanctioned individuals who there are allegations they're involved in genocide, and then the Chinese government sanctions British individuals who are trying to expose genocide. This is how crazy this is. But to have sanctions imposed against backbench MPs basically is not just an attack on me, Majid, but it's an attack on my select committee. It's an attack on the Houses of Parliament, because basically it's saying that MPs in the UK need to be told to be kept quiet. Imagine
on human rights issues. Yes.
Well, it's all, yeah, but us MPs, Majid, we're not very good at keeping quiet.
I hope not. I hope not. Hello, Ms. Ghani, are you there?
I'm still here. Forgive me. I was worried that we were going to talk over each other.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the other issue that China fails to understand is that UK parliamentarians aren't in any way, can't be forced to do anything by their prime minister or their party, but actually we're in parliament representing our constituents, and our constituents are the ones that we fear the most. And if they thought the sanctions were a way of controlling us or stopping us talking about the Uyghur issue, it has done the opposite, Majid. More people are interested and they want to know why we've had sanctions imposed on us, which means that we have more opportunity to talk about the plight of the Uyghur. So I would say that the sanctions have backfired on the Chinese government.
Now, clearly, one piece of evidence for why and how they've backfired is suddenly the attention of the Prime Minister is square on this issue, bang in the centre of this issue, because he just met you at number 10. So how did that meeting go and what was it for?
So the meeting just took place a couple of hours ago, Majid. You're the first person I'm speaking about it publicly, apart from my husband, obviously. Prime Minister, along with a lot of our colleagues, just found it incredibly peculiar that backbench MPs will be targeted, because it was seen as a affront in our democracy and affront in a way that we should be able to conduct ourselves as MPs without fear. And the meeting with the Prime Minister, for me, was incredibly substantial because it shows publicly, because the photos were tweeted out on the Prime Minister's own Twitter feed, that he is standing side by side with his colleagues. And by standing with us, he's also showing us the strength that we have in continuing to campaign, for me in particular, on the Uyghur issue. I think it's a substantial meeting, but I think the photo being tweeted out from the Prime Minister's own Twitter feed is an incredibly bold step, and I'm incredibly proud of our Prime Minister this morning.
But Ms. Ghani, it's gone even further than that, hasn't it? Because what's happened in response to China retaliating against people like you and other legislators simply for raising human rights issues is not only our Prime Minister Boris Johnson met you at number 10, but the American President Biden has also come out in defense of all of those that were sanctioned by China, including yourself. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, Majid. So yesterday, I believe, President Biden spoke to our Prime Minister Johnson, and the conversation took place over a number of issues, but a topic that was also discussed was the sanctions against parliamentarians or senators or MEPs around the world, and what more could be done to ensure that people who are working in parliaments like ours don't have to fear foreign interference, and how do we ensure that this isn't a start of something incredibly uncomfortable, and how we need to nip it in the bud. So you're right, Majid, not only have we met with the Prime Minister today, the sanctions have also enabled a conversation between the President of America and our Prime Minister.
Well, this is world-changing stuff. This is the kind of stuff that changes the course of history. So allow me, first of all, to salute you for this, because I imagine that, especially for the Uyghur people, this must be incredibly encouraging and heartening news, having been ignored for so long. I mean, I remember personally speaking about this issue about 11 years ago, and it being met with on deaf ears. So this is fantastic that Mr. Biden, now President Biden, has also gotten involved. One of the things he suggested is in response to China's Belt and Road Initiative, through which they maintain influence, control, and build a sphere of influence around the world. One of the things that Mr. Biden suggested in response is that perhaps Western democratic alliances, maybe, which he didn't say, through the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, perhaps we could build some form of coalition as a counterpoint to the Belt and Road through work investing in those countries. But of course, it would have to be with no forms of strings attached like China's Belt and Road has strings attached. Is that something you've come across as a suggestion? And even if not, what is your view on that?
I think that's absolutely right, Majid. I think your listeners will probably be saying at the same time, why is it UK parliamentarians that were sanctioned? Or why is it the UK parliamentarians talk about this so much? There is a problem around the world where a number of countries who might be even closer to the issue, or there's always an argument, why don't more Muslim countries talk about this, because the Uyghur are majority Muslim. And there is a problem that these countries do not feel that they are independent enough, or I would say that they don't have the confidence to speak up against